February 23, 1945, Mount Suribachi, Iwo Jima. Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto knelt inside a reinforced concrete bunker, his hands shaking as he scribbled forbidden thoughts into a small diary, words that, if discovered, would have guaranteed execution under Imperial Army regulations. Everything he had been taught about American weakness had collapsed within minutes of real combat. The Marines are not human. They do not fall as other men do. Everything we were told was false. Through the narrow firing slit, he had just watched a sight that contradicted every belief instilled during training. 6 U.S. Marines had charged his position through a storm of machine gun fire. 3 were struck down instantly, yet the remaining 3 continued forward without hesitation. When his comrades hurled a volley of grenades, Yamamoto witnessed something he could barely comprehend. One Marine threw himself onto the blast to shield the others, then rose with horrific wounds and kept fighting until his body physically failed. The bunker fell within minutes. Across Iwo Jima, 21,000 Japanese troops occupied a labyrinth of underground tunnels, nearly 18 kilometers of interconnected defenses carved into volcanic rock. They had been assured American troops were weak and would collapse under pressure. Instead, they faced an enemy whose ferocity would unravel every assumption the Imperial Japanese Army had made about its adversary. The cost of that miscalculation would be staggering. In just 36 days, U.S. Marines would suffer 26,000 casualties fighting for the island. But this collapse of confidence had begun years earlier. August 7, 1942, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, a veteran of Japan's seemingly unstoppable campaigns in China, wrote bitterly in his diary during the first week of combat. "These Americans are unlike any enemy we have encountered. They do not withdraw when surrounded. They do not surrender even when hopeless. They fight at night as if they draw strength from darkness rather than fear it." Guadalcanal was Japan's first major defensive engagement in the Pacific. The Imperial Japanese Army expected an easy victory over inexperienced U.S. forces. Roughly 16,000 Marines of the 1st Marine Division came ashore. Japanese intelligence had labeled Marines as well-trained but ultimately still soft products of a democratic society unaccustomed to sacrifice. Reality contradicted every expectation. Lieutenant Shigeru Fukudome, commanding a reinforced company, was ordered to recapture Henderson Field on the night of August 20th. His 200 men, seasoned veterans able to defeat Chinese units triple their size, advanced confidently through jungle terrain. Certain American troops would panic in darkness. Instead, they walked directly into a deliberate kill zone. The Marines waited in expertly prepared positions with overlapping machine gun fire. What followed shattered Japanese doctrine. Rather than remain fixed in defense, Marines counterattacked immediately, at night, through dense jungle, using precise automatic fire. In his diary recovered after his death 3 days later, Fukudome wrote, "They attacked us in darkness. Night is supposed to be ours. They moved through terrain we considered impossible. They killed silently, then disappeared. At dawn, only 90 of my men remained. They lost only 12. Across Guadalcanal, Japanese troops who once relied on shock tactics and banzai charges found themselves facing Marines who refused to collapse, even when positions were overrun. They fought hand-to-hand, bayonets, knives, fists, against odds no other Allied unit in the Pacific consistently endured. Sergeant Kenji Matsumoto, who survived 4 months on the island, described watching a Marine machine gunner continue firing with both legs shattered until Japanese infantry reached him at arm's length. His assistant immediately took the weapon and continued firing. Matsumoto wrote, "We lost 40 men to that single position." What created such soldiers? Japanese intelligence officers interrogating captured Marines in 1943 were unsettled by what they discovered. Private Yamamoto first learned the truth in these briefings. The staff officer delivering the report seemed troubled. Marine training would be judged criminal in any civilized army. Recruits are broken mentally and physically, then rebuilt into something unrecognizable from the civilians they once were. They do not surrender. They do not consider retreat honorable. But there was a critical difference, one Japan had not anticipated. The U.S. Marine Corps combined near-fanatical training with massive industrial support. Japanese soldiers followed Bushido with rifles that grew increasingly obsolete. Marines followed training just as harsh but wielded overwhelming firepower that made Japanese positions untenable. November 20, 1943, Tarawa Atoll. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki, commanding 4,500 defenders behind what were considered unbreakable fortifications, declared that 1,000,000 men could not take Tarawa in 100 years. The U.S. 2nd Marine Division proved him wrong in 76 hours. Private First Class Tadashi Ogawa, one of only 17 Japanese survivors, recounted what he witnessed. The first wave died in the water. We killed hundreds. More arrived. The second wave died on the beach. More came. The third wave reached our positions with flamethrowers. They stopped only when we died. The casualties were staggering. Nearly every Japanese defender died. U.S. Marines suffered over 3,000 casualties in 3 days. Captured Japanese intelligence documents later described U.S. Marines as shock troops demonstrating unwavering commitment to objectives. Casualties do not reduce their effectiveness until the entire unit is destroyed. This was the emerging pattern. Marine units accepted losses at a rate that would cause any other military to break. Japanese commanders studying these battles concluded that Marines operated by a different logic. Casualties were the price of accelerated victory. And they paid that price without pause. The Japanese High Command attempted to understand how U.S. Marines maintained such relentless pressure. The comparisons grew more alarming as each campaign unfolded. Captain Yoshio Kobayashi, a Guadalcanal survivor, produced one of the most detailed analyses. His conclusions stunned Tokyo. The U.S. Army fights conventionally. The Marines fight differently. They advance regardless of casualties. They accept losses no rational commander would consider. This behavior is unprecedented. Speed was another shock. On Peleliu, Lieutenant Colonel Kunio Nakagawa built his defense assuming American forces would pause for regrouping after the initial landings. Japanese doctrine relied on exploiting that pause. But Marines landed on September 15 at 8:30 and held half the airfield by nightfall. Nakagawa wrote in frustration, "My defensive plan collapsed immediately because it assumed the enemy would behave logically. The Marines do not follow predictable military logic. They operate with absolute commitment." This absolute commitment often looked suicidal to Japanese observers but proved brutally effective. On Bougainville, Sergeant Kenji Matsumoto saw a Marine platoon advance across open ground swept by machine gun fire from 3 mutually supporting bunkers. Japanese doctrine mandated artillery preparation and smoke screens before any such assault. The Marine lieutenant visually assessed the position for less than a minute before ordering an immediate charge. 7 Marines fell in the first 20 seconds. But the survivors stormed the first bunker with grenades and demolition charges. 3 more men died assaulting the second bunker. 5 Marines remained standing when they took the third. In 4 minutes, the position fell. Matsumoto wrote, "This was not courage. This was the calculated use of casualties to accomplish an objective before we could respond." The concept horrified Japanese officers. Marines viewed casualties not as deterrents but as part of the cost of achieving the mission quickly. This created a strategic dilemma for Japanese defenders. Any position strong enough to stop a Marine advance required troops and firepower that weakened the rest of the defensive line. Any position too lightly defended fell instantly. Every choice led to defeat. By 1944, senior commanders recognized a fundamental imbalance. Marine casualties, even when severe, did not reduce their operational tempo. Major Yoshi Takahari, a staff officer on Iwo Jima who survived the battle, explained this imbalance during post-war interrogation. General Kuribayashi understood that we could not stop the Marines. Our defenses were intended only to delay. We inflicted casualties on a scale that would halt any other military force. Over 20,000 Marines were killed or wounded on Iwo Jima. Yet their attack never slowed. Japanese planning had assumed that inflicting 10,000 casualties would stall an American offensive for a week. Instead, the Marines suffered that number in the first 7 days on Iwo Jima and continued their assault without interruption. This revealed the ultimate reality. American casualties could be replaced instantly, Japanese casualties could not. This disparity grew even more devastating when logistics were considered. Second Lieutenant Toshio Yamamoto, captured on Saipan, recalled infiltrating Marine lines on the third night after the invasion. We expected chaos and exhaustion. Any Japanese force after 3 days of combat would be starving, low on ammunition, and desperate. Instead, the Marines ate hot meals, received continuous ammunition by truck, had medical tents treating the wounded, and rest areas where units rotated schedules. Their supply dumps held more ammunition than my entire regiment. He concluded. Defeating such a force was impossible. U.S. logistics enabled Marines to fight at intensities unimaginable to Japanese units, who operated with critically limited ammunition, food, and medical support. Every additional day of combat weakened Japanese defenders and strengthened Marine attackers. Peleliu illustrated this dynamic starkly. Colonel Nakagawa's forces inflicted horrific casualties on the 1st Marine Division, so severe that it had to be removed from frontline service. But the Marines were immediately replaced by fresh units from the U.S. Army's 81st Infantry Division. Japanese forces, lacking reinforcement, simply declined toward annihilation. The war had become a numbers game. One Japan could not win. Japanese defensive strategy throughout 1944 and early 1945 shifted from confident engagement to fatalistic delay. A captured Tinian document outlined the new Imperial Army doctrine bluntly. When facing Marines, do not expect them to retreat. Do not assume casualties will reduce their morale. Do not believe numerical superiority provides advantage. Marines neutralize numbers through firepower. Do not attempt banzai charges except as final necessity. Marines will annihilate charging troops with automatic weapons and artillery. Accept that all positions will fall. Your role is to inflict maximum casualties before being overrun. It was a doctrine built on inevitability rather than hope. By early 1945, General Tadamaki Kurabayashi, tasked with defending Iwo Jima, understood the reality with mathematical clarity. In a letter to his wife in January, 1 month before the invasion, he wrote, "I am asked to defend Iwo Jima against 70,000 Marines. They will control the sea and the sky. They will possess limitless ammunition and supplies. They will attack until this island falls. My mission is not victory. My mission is to make the Americans bleed enough that they reconsider invading Japan itself." Kurabayashi accepted that defeat was guaranteed, only the cost remained variable. He created a defensive network unlike any Japan had constructed before. Instead of beach defenses relying on suicidal banzai charges, he built a vast underground fortress. 11 miles of tunnel. 1,500 fortified cave complexes. Mutually supporting strongpoints. Concealed artillery positions pre-registered for precise fire. The beaches became engineered kill zones. On February 19, 1945, 3 U.S. Marine divisions, nearly 70,000 men, landed on Iwo Jima. Kurabayashi's defenses performed exactly as designed. Naval bombardment barely scratched the fortifications. Marines stepped onto the beaches and were instantly cut down by perfectly coordinated artillery and mortar fire. The black volcanic sand filled with casualties. For a brief moment, it appeared Kurabayashi's plan might stop the invasion. But the Marines did something he had not seen on any previous island. They did not retreat. They pressed deeper, even into the killing zones. Gaps between firing positions were exploited within minutes. When one assault team fell, another moved in. When fire blocked the advance, demolition teams crawled forward under direct fire, replacing each other as they fell. The attack never paused. Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto observed one such assault from his bunker. His diary captured Japanese disbelief. A Marine with a flamethrower approached. "We killed him instantly." His assistant picked up the weapon. "We killed him." A third Marine took the flamethrower, badly wounded. He continued firing until the tank emptied. Then he threw grenades until we killed him. By then engineers reached the bunker's entrance. "We were finished." This repeated many times in the first hour. The Marines' refusal to halt created a grim equation the Japanese could not solve. By the end of the first day, it was already clear that Iwo Jima would fall. The question was only how long it would take and how many would die. Japanese troops had long considered their night attacks decisive. But against Marines, nighttime no longer offered sanctuary. What had once been Japan's domain became a battlefield of constant pressure. Colonel Kiyono Ichiki experienced this the hard way on Guadalcanal in August 1942. Leading 900 men in a classic night assault on the Tarawa River, he assumed darkness would terrify American troops. But the raiders of the 1st Marine Raider Battalion waited in fortified positions. As Ichiki's men crossed the river at 1:30, the raiders opened fire at point-blank range, supported by pre-registered artillery. Within 20 minutes, more than 700 Japanese troops were dead. Marine casualties, 35. Though Raider battalions were later absorbed into the regular Marine divisions, their tactics spread through the Corps. By 1943, standard Marine units had adopted 24-hour operations, continuous night patrols, aggressive infiltration, independent squad-level maneuver, seamless communication via radios Japanese troops lacked. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, captured on Okinawa after fighting on 3 islands, later summarized the experience. The Marines never stopped. Day attacks with overwhelming firepower, night attacks by infiltrating teams, constant artillery harassment, airstrikes all day. There was no rest, only combat until death or capture. Japanese doctrine relied on resting after daylight engagements. Against Marines, rest was impossible. The industrial component of Marine warfare was equally devastating. Japanese units relied on courage and improvisation. Marines applied synchronized, mechanized violence. Second Lieutenant Saburo Endo, artillery observer on Saipan, watched in horror as the Marines executed combined arms assaults. Hours of naval bombardment. Aerial strikes delivered with precision. Infantry advancing behind tanks and flamethrowers. Artillery obliterating any resistance. Immediate exploitation by rifle squads. He wrote, "They destroy positions with overwhelming force, then advance over ground that no longer resembles terrain. We fight with rifles. They fight with an entire nation's industry." Marine assaults were not chaotic charges. They were methodical, engineered destruction. By mid-war, Japanese soldiers realized they were fighting not warriors, but the industrialized edge of a superpower. Marine assaults across the Pacific exposed a truth the Japanese command could no longer ignore. The U.S. Marine Corps fought with a blend of discipline, firepower, endurance, and industrial strength unmatched by any Japanese formation. Captain Shigeru Fuku, whose detailed notes were recovered after his death on Guadalcanal, explained the difference clearly. Marines do not fight like individual soldiers. They fight as components of a single machine. He observed that Marine assaults unfolded in a tightly synchronized sequence. Riflemen fixing the Japanese position. Machine gunners suppressing movement. Mortars laying smoke to blind observers. Artillery blasting strongpoints. Tanks breaking defensive lines. Aircraft striking positions unreachable by shells. All of this happened within minutes, coordinated by junior NCOs using radios the Japanese lacked. Fuku wrote, "We cannot counter them. By the time our commanders issue orders, the Marines have already acted." This speed and autonomy made Japanese defenses obsolete. Marine adaptability terrified Japanese commanders. NCOs made decisions that, in the Imperial Army, required high-ranking officers. Corporals redirected assaults, called in supporting fire, and shifted routes the instant opportunities appeared. This decentralized flexibility meant Marines consistently outpaced Japanese responses. The conditions of close combat further amplified Marine advantage. Japanese defenders had always believed hand-to-hand combat favored them. But on Saipan and Peleliu, they learned painfully that Marine determination in close quarters often surpassed their own. Private First Class Teacher Yoshida, wounded during the massive banzai charge on Saipan, described what shocked him most. "We were taught Americans feared close combat. We charged expecting them to break. Instead they fought us at arm's length. I saw a Marine sergeant kill 7 men before he fell. The charge, 3,000 strong, resulted in nearly total Japanese loss. Marines held the line despite being outnumbered 10-1. Their willingness to counterattack immediately, rather than fall back, shattered the Japanese assumption that spirit alone could overwhelm firepower. Propaganda within Japan had insisted Americans were physically weak and served by cowardly instincts. Yet on campaign after campaign, Marines endured conditions that severely strained Japanese troops, sleeping in flooded foxholes, eating cold rations, operating in suffocating heat. Corporal Kenji Matsumoto, captured on Bougainville, wrote, "We starved. They ate 3 full meals a day. We rationed ammunition. They had more than our regiment combined. We fought with exhaustion. They rotated units from the line, rested, and returned stronger." This contrast broke morale long before physical defeat. The material imbalance was overwhelming. Marines possessed Sherman tanks with flamethrowers, artillery that could fire hundreds of rounds within minutes, naval gunfire capable of leveling entire hillsides, aircraft delivering tons of bombs precisely, endless ammunition, water, rations, and medical support. When defenders with rifles and light machine guns met U.S. combined arms, the outcome was predetermined. Lieutenant Suburo Endo, observing Marine tactics on Saipan, described his shock. They used every available weapon as a single system. We possessed courage. They possessed the tools of an industrial nation. This industrial might directly translated into combat endurance. Wounded Marines received plasma, antibiotics, and immediate surgical care. Japanese wounded often died from infection or blood loss. Marines returned to battle within days, sometimes hours, while Japanese losses were permanently final. Unit regeneration widened the gulf. Marine divisions suffering catastrophic casualties returned to full strength within weeks. Japanese units could not rebuild losses at all. This regeneration enabled Marines to maintain the offensive indefinitely. By late 1944, Japanese analysts finally understood that the Pacific War was not simply a contest of bravery, it was a collision between Japan's limited resources and America's enormous industrial base. General Tadamaki Kuribayashi, after fighting Marines for weeks on Iwo Jima, summarized this bitter truth. They have everything. We have courage. Courage is not enough. Marine firepower did more than destroy Japanese defenses, it reshaped the psychology of every battlefield. Japanese soldiers had long been trained to view death in combat as honorable, especially death by bayonet, artillery, or rifle fire. But one weapon shattered that belief completely: the flamethrower. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, captured on Okinawa with severe burns, described its horrific effect. Bullets are honorable. Artillery is honorable. Fire is not. You smell men burn alive. You hear them screaming. There is no glory in such a death. It is industrial slaughter. Japanese troops, accustomed to romantic notions of warrior death, had no answer to an enemy who employed tools designed not for honor, but for absolute effectiveness. Every major island battle confirmed the same pattern: fortified caves, tunnels, and bunkers, which Japanese planners believed would guarantee survival, became death traps once flamethrowers, tanks, and demolition teams began their systematic advance. The Marines turned modern warfare into something Japan had not prepared for: a science of annihilation. As the Marines advanced across the Pacific, Japanese intelligence documented a growing truth: that Marine riflemen, machine gunners, and NCOs displayed marksmanship and battlefield initiative surpassing anything Imperial forces faced. One Tinian report warned, "Marines are physically larger, receive superior nutrition from childhood, and carry weapons with ranges exceeding those of our rifles. Their marksmanship is exceptional. Their equipment is reliable under all conditions." It continued with an even more unsettling admission. Marines are trained to believe surrender is unacceptable. They fight to death or victory. This contradicted years of propaganda claiming Americans feared close combat and suffered weak morale. On Saipan, Japanese soldiers watched wounded Marines continue firing until physically incapacitated. On Guam, they observed Marines advancing through heat that left Japanese soldiers dehydrated and collapsing. The final guidance from that same intelligence report revealed the collapse in Japanese confidence. Do not expect them to retreat. Do not assume casualties will break their spirit. Do not think numbers grant advantage. Do not attempt mass charges, Marines will destroy them. Do not expect night attacks to succeed. The only viable defensive tactic was delay, not victory. General Kuribayashi, studying every Pacific campaign to prepare Iwo Jima's defenses, reached the same conclusion. His January 1945 assessment stated, "The Marines will land with overwhelming numbers. They will have unlimited ammunition, complete air and naval control, and logistical support impossible to counter. They will attack until this island falls." Kuribayashi's goal became mathematical. Delay the U.S. advance long enough that Japanese leadership might reconsider national strategy. His defensive construction, 11 miles of tunnel, camouflaged artillery, deep fortifications, was not designed to repel Marines, but to inflict casualties at a rate high enough to affect American politics. The defenders knew they would die. Their purpose was measured in days, not victory. Yet even this desperate calculation failed. The Marines absorbed losses that would have shattered any other military force and kept advancing. Kuribayashi's forces inflicted over 20,000 Marine casualties in 36 days. But the Marines, supported by limitless firepower and reinforcements, continued attacking with undiminished ferocity. The Japanese defenders fell one position at a time, each bunker becoming a brief delaying action before being encircled, burned out, or pulverized by explosives. Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto, in his final diary entry before being killed, wrote, "We believed American materialism made them weak. But Marines have both spirit and endless supplies. They are what we claim to be. We are what we claim they were." His bunker held for 40 minutes before being destroyed by a Marine demolition team. It was the same scene repeated across the entire island. The battles that followed Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima left a clear truth carved into every island. No Japanese unit ever stopped a Marine advance. They could delay it, bleed it, scorch the earth beneath it, but never break it. Marines suffered catastrophic casualties across the Pacific, 86,000 total, including 19,500 killed, yet they never failed to take an objective, never relinquished ground once seized, and never allowed Japanese defenders to regain momentum. Japanese officers who survived the war admitted they had never encountered an enemy who fought with such a combination of endurance, technology, organization, and psychological resilience. Corporal Kenji Matsumoto, interviewed in 1946, described the despair on the defensive lines. "The worst part was knowing they would never stop. You could kill half a Marine unit and the survivors would still attack. You could wound their officers and their sergeants took command. You could fight them to exhaustion, and they would attack again the next morning. There was no way to win." What broke Japanese confidence most was not Marine aggression, it was Marine regeneration. Divisions mauled in one battle returned to full strength within a few months, reinforced with well-trained replacements, unlimited equipment, and full logistical support. Japanese units had no such capacity. On islands like Saipan and Iwo Jima, Japanese wounded often died from infection or starvation. Marine wounded received plasma, morphine, surgery, evacuation by air or sea, and returned home or back to battle. This contrast shattered the belief that Japan's warrior spirit could compensate for inferior resources. After the surrender in August 1945, many Japanese soldiers who had feared Marines for years finally met them as occupiers and were shocked. Instead of brutality, they encountered medical treatment, food distribution, and humane administration. Private Teisher Yoshida, repatriated in 1946 after surviving wounds from Saipan, summarized the revelation. "Everything we were told was lies. The Marines did not torture. They did not abuse prisoners. They treated us better than our own officers had. We were the barbarians, not them." This recognition, spread across thousands of post-war interrogations, revealed the complete collapse of propaganda that had shaped Japanese expectations for decades. But the most profound judgment came from the one man who understood Marine capabilities more deeply than any Japanese commander, General Tadamaki Kurabayashi, architect of Iwo Jima's defense. Smuggled from his final headquarters before his death, his last message to Tokyo read, "I have fought the Marines for 31 days. They are the finest soldiers I have encountered. Their training is superior. Their equipment is overwhelming. Their courage equals ours. Their numbers are endless. Japan cannot defeat such an enemy." His final assessment was not emotional. It was mathematical, tactical, and brutally honest. Japan could never match Marine firepower, logistics, mobility, or the American industrial machine behind them. The Marines represented the point of a spear forged by a nation with infinite resources and a culture that demanded victory at any cost. Kurabayashi ended with a message for future defenders of Japan. When the Marines come, you cannot stop them. You can only delay them. They will pay the price in blood, and then they will win. He never lived to see the atomic bombs fall or Japan surrender. But his words became the final verdict on the Pacific War. Across every battlefield, the same truth emerged. Japanese courage alone could not defeat Marine training. Japanese skill alone could not overcome American logistics. Japanese fortifications alone could not withstand modern combined arms. And no warrior ethos could match Marines who refused to stop, ever. The Pacific War taught Japan a lesson learned too late. An enemy with both spirit and unlimited material strength will always overcome an enemy with spirit alone. The Marines delivered that lesson on every island, mile by mile, bunker by bunker, with a relentless efficiency that defined the brutal end of the Pacific Campaign.